It is a pleasure to be here today. I was one of the first psychics officially invited here to give seminars for a weekend. But that the A.R.E. should get together with remote viewing, you know, that's really a little dicey. I think that that's sort of an achievement. Don't you all think that's an achievement? And I also want to acknowledge the people in remote viewing who has kept it alive for as long as it has been, and it's a growing intellectual factor in the world anyway, because there was a time in the late 80s when remote viewing was doomed to disappear because most of the work was classified and nobody was picking up on it anywhere, and I completely thought that it was going to vanish because of that kind of thing. The A.R.E. and the remote viewing and other spiritual psychic organizations around the world fly directly in the face of the great social commitment to keeping humans uninformed about their psychic nature. One of the reasons is, you know, that they don't want mind reading to be available just to everyone, you know. And so there are social barriers to even sponsoring this kind of thing independently. And they don't want telepathy either. Can you imagine what it would be like if there was telepathists everywhere running around knowing everybody's secrets? For many years I thought, gosh, what am I going to do when I grow up? And what I wanted to do never worked out, but other things worked out. And then I got to be middle-aged, and I said, gosh, what am I going to do in my middle age? So that got taken care of. And then I got to be older, and I said, what am I going to do when I get older, when I get old? But just recently, like in the last month, I began to wonder what I'm going to do in my next life. I don't want to live forever. I want a brand new body. And I want to design it. I think if the society was 60% telepathic, that you wouldn't have to make decisions because everybody would be in accord on the same page from the beginning of the book. And I mean, we can't think of a telepathic society and then think in terms of the society it's been replacing. So that's a reality box, you know, and it's got all sorts of things in it. And here's a new society where it's telepathic, and we can't use this as a model, I don't think. I don't know if that makes sense to you or not. But you know, we're trapped in our past. We're trapped in our past. We look to the past to figure out what to do in the present. We look for precedents in the past. We look for things that worked and things that didn't work. Things that controlled the population the best and the things that didn't, and so forth and so on. We're also trapped in our language. How many here realize that? Yeah. The words we use are limited. Well, the meanings or the concepts we attach to the words we use limit us to those concepts, you know. And so we work in them, you know, like ESP, which Dr. Ryan, bless his little evil heart, dumped on us. I knew him, you know. We're trapped in that, extrasensory perception. Well, what the heck does that mean, you know? I mean, this says, okay, we have a body, and that's intrasensory perception, I suppose. And if we sense things out here, that's extrasensory perception. But the fact is that everything is interacting with each other, and we don't need to think in the terms of these. This is a dichotomy. Is it physical or is it psychic? You know, that's a dichotomy. The main thing is, the principal thing is, that the body perceptions and the extrasensory perceptions are exactly perceptions. And it really doesn't matter whether they're inside the body or outside the body or floating around in an out-of-body state or anything like that. There's a word in English that's very seldom used. It's called sensorium. Do you know what a sensorium is? It was first used in about 1865, I believe, to describe it was called an organ, in quotes, an organ of perception that senses the rays of everything. Have any of you sensed rays of anything? I can sense your rays. Can you sense mine? Shall I make a ray that you can sense? Okay, so here's an organ, hypothetically called a sensorium. It's the total package of our sensory apparatus, whether physical, mental, spiritual, of the soul, or anything else that you want to add on to that. And so every cell in your body is sensing something. And then you have the electromagnetic field or the energetic fields around the body, which are made up of particles too. And they're each one of them sensing something. And then there's what the Theosophists like to call the etheric aura, which is refined, much above the physical, the grosser auras and things like that. And that's made up of probably particles too, each of which is dedicated to sensing a particular this and that, like every sensory portion of our body is dedicated to sensing a specific thing. Right? So, where's the seat of perception? Well, we're not just sitting on it. You know, we don't know where the seat of perception is. Maybe there isn't a seat of perception. Maybe we're just living in a big, vast cosmic universe, each little tiny particle of which is its own sensing system. And we're just a conglomerate of them. You know, that doesn't explain evolution, of course, and it doesn't even explain creationism. But it explains us a little better than any of these reality box packages that we're programmed into throughout our life and in which we obey. In the 70s and 80s, scientists with their great electron microscopes and everything began to find that cells in our body act as receptors, all kinds of data. And by 1991 had sort of published one little book and made a list of these kind of things. Did you know that you have receptors in your nose that smell emotion? Yeah? How do you know that? What? You smell them, yeah. Do you know you have receptors in your taste buds that sense motives? Motives from other people. So if you go around with your tongue, when you're talking to somebody, just give them your tongue and you might sense their motives and things like that. You know, these are all things that used to be attributed to parapsychology and to some kind of non-physical apparatus, right? Extrasensory perception was not supposed to emanate from physical things. For whatever the reasons were, I was born into this life, and by the time I was 3 months old, I could see people's auras, and I could do this, and I could go out of body and travel around and so forth and so on. And I finally realized at about the age 2.5 that I needed to read a dictionary through page by page as soon as possible so I would know how to talk about these things. So I did that, and thereby I found out that you weren't supposed to talk about these things. This was back in 1936, I guess. You know, you see how aged I am? So then, you know, you are subjected to cultural conditioning around you, and you like to fit into that cultural conditioning, so you learn what not to talk about and what to talk about and so forth and so on. So yourself, as one of these magnificent sensoriums that you are, gradually gets collapsed down until you fit in. And it has to be a true fitting in, because even though the people around you don't want you to talk about these things, a lot of them have residual telepathy anyway, and they can sense whether you're fitting in or not. How many people here have never fit in? Look at this, you see. I mean, and how many people here have fit in? Well, you have to fit in, you know. Um, I mean, that's the rule of the game out there. That's the social scenario out there, so you have to fit in. And so by the time I was 15 and I was wanting to date this girl that I fell in love with and everything, and I had to fit in order to be able to do that, you know. And that relationship lasted all through high school and everything. And then she went off and married somebody else anyway. So, and then I got into college. I signed up for Psych 101. And so I was in there, and they were talking and going on and everything, and it seemed very mundane and boring to me. And I said, well, how do you incorporate psychic phenomena in all this? So I was asked to leave the course. Yeah. Thrown out of Psych 101. And, you know, we don't have, you know, we have a tremendous range of awareness potentials. And you would think that awareness is really important to us, right? There is no awareness 101. And the lacking of 101s is a list about this long that goes down to the floor, you know. There should be a sensing danger 101. Our systems are set up to do it. It's called direct instinctual perception in some scientific papers, you know. But how many of you here have ever sensed danger? Yeah. Very convincing, isn't it? How many of you obeyed it? How many of you didn't obey it? Yeah, you're walking along. When these things you plug in your ear and listen to records in your ears, and you walk down the street, what are they called? I forget. Whatever. So I'm walking down the street listening to Wagner at top volume, you know, and I come to the curb here and I put my foot out and a voice overrides this music and says, don't take that step. So here I am, and I move my foot back, and a car comes rushing around the corner from behind me, bounces over the curb just within a fraction of an inch of my toes, and I back up just a little bit, and 2 cop cars do the same thing. Now, is that something functioning in you? How many of you had a dramatic thing like that? Ah, look at this. That's why we're here, isn't it? So then, after I left the UN in 1969, I couldn't earn any money because already I was unemployable. And so I took to writing sex novels. That was that was the big wave of I mean, there's a better word for it, but I'm not going to use it. And they had to be 37,000 words long, and they had to be readable. They couldn't be edited too much because you sold them to the mafia in New York. And the mafia, if they liked this book, they'd give you a check for $250, and you could go around to the corner at the little bank on Broadway and Canal Street, and they'd cash it without asking for any ID, everything. My rent back then was $35 a month, and I could do one of these a week. So I was rolling in dough in those things there. And then I met my dear friend Zelda Souple, knew everybody in parapsychology and things like that. And through her, I started meeting all these kooks, you know. She was a past life regressor also, and people were coming to her for past life regressions and finding out they were all Cleopatra. Lots of Cleopatras walked out of Zelda's apartment. And then Zelda gave parties every once in a while. Everybody tanked up on really cheap wine. And I met Cleve Baxter at one of these parties. And this is the plant guy. You've heard of him? Yeah. So he had he had a lie detecting school in New York which he trained lie detecting experts for the CIA and the FBI and things like that. And, you know, the lie detector is a galvanic skin response system. And one day he got very tired of this, so one day he hooked his Dracaena plant up to a lie detecting equipment just to see what was happening. So the Dracaena was pushing waves up like this on the chart recorder and everything. And then Cleve went over and broke a leaf off. And the thing went just like this, which means the plant was responding to this damage and injury. And he became very famous for that. And so at one of Zelda's parties, I said, I'd like to see that plant do that. So he's come up to the lab. And he had his lab off Broadway on about 47th Street and things like that. He was a junk food king, too. All he ate was junk food, and there was lots of junk food in that area of Manhattan. And so I got to his lab, and he showed me around, and then he showed me the Dracaena plant. Here's a photograph of it, right here. And I said, oh, well, who's going to influence it? And he said, you are. I said, I don't know how to do that. He says, you don't have to know how to do it. Just sit there, and when I tell you to do something, just imagine that you're going to strike a match and burn its leaf. So he got it all going, and then he said, do it, and I did it, and the plant went like this. So I says, well, and he said, well, do it again, and do it again, and do it again, and do it again. Imagine you're doing something harmful and everything. And then after a while, the plant calmed down and wouldn't react anymore. And I said, well, what does that mean? And he says, it means the plant has understood that you're just faking it and you're not going to do it, and there's no need to get excited about it. So then Cleve, having hooked up plants and everything, decided to hook up everything. He took scrapings out of the urine bowls in the men's room of this big building and hooked them up, and they did this and they did that, and then he took all kinds of things, skin samples, skin scrapings, and hooked them up, and they did everything like that. And he told me that, boy, sperm lasts a long time in an active life state. Well, I hope this doesn't embarrass you, but this is science, after all. And then he took blood from a guy, shot it into a vial, hooked the blood up to these machines with 2 electrodes in it, and then he poked the donor with a pin, and the blood did this thing here. And in fact, that effect could be done 5 blocks away, wherever the guy went. When you can stick somebody over here, their blood is over here responding to it, what does that suggest to you? The whole universe must be somehow interconnected, which is what certain sages in the past have said all along, right? Well, mystics, have you ever had a mystical high? And one of the key factors that comes out of that is you realize that everything, this is one, whatever, and everything like that. But 20 years ago, scientists hated Cleve Baxter like mad. And he got all sorts of bad press and everything. But, you know, it just seems like it fell off of Cleve Baxter like water off of a duck. And in the late 70s, you know, scientists said plants don't have nervous systems, so they cannot respond to these kind of things because this is a nervous system response, right? And then in about 1977 or 78, that terrible magazine, Scientific American, published an article about some guys and a gal that had found out that plants have rudimentary nervous systems. And this was specific to tomato plants. And when a tomato plant feels a caterpillar coming up its stem, it sends an electro-coded signal to all the cells in its body to produce a poison that is toxic to this little guy climbing up and ready to chomp away. Did you know that? Cleve Baxter should have been pulled up out of his obscurity and made much of, but nobody's picked up on that yet. Can you believe that? It's now 20 years since. Yeah. Everything has a nervous system that's animate anyway. So there's stuff going on everywhere, you know, and you're just not sitting here as an inanimate physical blob. Are you? I hope not. That's what I want to retire to. I want to become an inanimate physical blob. Now, so Cleve Baxter's work started me. I thought, well, I'll do this. I'll volunteer to do this for a couple months, and then I'll get back to trying to earn money writing sex novels. And that was in 71. And in 72, I was front page news, having succeeded a great deal at the American Society for Psychical Research, and so forth and so on. And the last thing I ever imagined was that very soon I would be working for covert research development sponsored by AIC. I just put it backwards so I don't mention. And then Cleve Baxter made what I thought was this terrible mistake. He recommended I be in touch with this Dr. Puthoff there. And I said, what for? You know, I didn't want to do this. I want to get back to earning a little bit of money, you know. So I wrote him a letter. And the next thing I knew was 16 years later, I still hadn't made any money off of sex novels. Now, in there's a lot of experiences, you know. I had been relatively an introvert up to that time. But when you get in parapsychology, you know, they're all nuts. If you're an introvert, they spit you out in 3 months. So I said, well, I do want to succeed, even though I don't want to do this for very long. I do want to succeed. So whenever they had an experiment that I thought was not a worthy experiment, I said, you know, this experiment sucks. Why don't you do this instead? So Gertrude Schmeidler and Janet Mitchell and Dr. Osis, I'd been getting good results, you know, so that gave me a little tiny clout. So they tried some of the things I wanted. And one of the first things I tried was, you know, the typical way of running an experiment, you hook the subject up to a microphone. And the subject then tried to float out of the body and see what they had on these trays up here. You're supposed to float up and look down and report what you were seeing. So the subjects were doing that. And meanwhile, you couldn't move from this chair more than an inch because your brain was hooked up to all these electrodes which were feeding to the wall, to the early Beckman dynagraphs, brainwave recorders, and things like that. So I tried that. And the fact of the matter is, I sometimes only saw shapes or forms, and I didn't know how to put them into words. So I'm thinking about how do I describe this, and in this process of thinking how I'm going to describe it, I came down from the ceiling and got back into my head, into the left hemisphere, and said, well, how are you going to describe this? So I thought that was a mess. And then even after you dictate this stuff, then it has to be transcribed by somebody else and put on a piece of paper, and then it's given to blind judges, so forth and so on. And this is a whole laborious BS project. So I said, I don't want to talk anymore. I just want to have a piece of paper and I want to draw what I'm seeing. This was not the first time this had happened in parapsychology, because it happened in 1904 too, in some early experiments where some stubborn, they didn't have verbal equipment back then, you know, and things like that. So I said, I'd rather draw it and I don't want to talk anymore. So I started making these little sketches. And these little sketches revolutionized and led the way into what became remote viewing, because wherever it was possible to do so, I encouraged abandoning the verbal method and assuming the visual method, because what's going on in your brain is not words, it's pictures, right? Yeah. You know, the human mind is now being called the fastest computer in existence, although I think there's some eight-legged water bugs in my building in New York who are faster than me. Have you ever tried to step on one of them? Break your legs trying to do so. So, no, the human mind produces pictures, mental image pictures, and you can sketch those. You don't need to describe them and things like that. Description takes time, you know, and you're moving from the visual mode into the literary mode, and that distorts the signals and everything like that. If you draw things rather than talk about it, actually, you know, there's about 33,000 languages being spoken on Earth at this minute, languages and dialects and everything like that. So somebody remote views the same target, and depending on what language they're using, they have to reconvert those signals into the linguistics that they're using, and then if you want it translated into another language, you've got to find a similar word and a similar word until you get down to the end, and there's nothing left of the signal. Let's take this from a computer point of view. If the computer is not programmed to function accurately every time, what are you going to have? Yeah. Is it going to survive as a computer? All right. So let's say that our sensorium and perceptual systems are acting like a computer. You know, what you're actually accessing is at least very tiny electromagnetic signals. You're not accessing the picture of this woman here. Your eye retinas are accessing an astronomical number of little electronic bits that are forwarded through the eye nerves up into wherever it goes to. And then those recombined to make a picture of her as you see it. See? I see this lady here has a very powerful energy thing along her spine and up the back of her head here, almost like she's about to be awakened. Or she hopes to be, anyway. Do you see that? Do you see that? Well, it's just because something in your system is not functioning to permit those kind of signals to achieve a visual status, you know. Okay, let's imagine that the human sensorium is a big board here. And along this big board are thousands and thousands of little toggle switches. You know what a toggle switch is? They go on and on and on and on, like this and so forth and so on. And let's say you have, well, the brain itself has something like 4 trillion cells in it, so you at least have that many toggle switches, you know. But let's say there's just 1,000. And after you get done with your social conditioning and you're made to fit into the society that you're fitting in with and so forth and so on, of these 1,000 toggle switches, maybe only 3 or 4 of them are still on. All the rest have been switched off. Okay? So your system are still getting the signals, probably the right signals, but if you only have 10 of the toggle switches switched on, the data has to be filtered through those, which might not be interested in that particular data, so you don't get anything. Down here are the super-duper psychic toggle switches, which have been closed off because you wanted to fit into a society that doesn't like that. So in theory, anyway, no, we don't get mixed up data. We get the signal, clear and loud. And it's the system that the data has to be filtered through that puts the distortions in it, if anything. I think that if these things are turned off, you're actually destroying part of what we are. Okay? You can get a balanced, controlled society by keeping the majority of people in it as dumb as possible. And then they do what they're told. You know, and they imprint on it too, and they forward it to their offspring, who forwards it on to their offspring, who forwards it on to their offspring, and things like that. I decided quite some time ago, all on my own, that we're over-endowed for mere survival on Earth, because we have all of these things going for us, and we don't need them to survive just as we're surviving, you know. So we're totally over-endowed. For instance, in Science News, somebody published an article that finally says how many colors the eye can identify. How many do you think?
It's 187.
187?
Something like
Colors, hues, tones, things, the whole schmear. Yes, ma'am.
There are 360 some different colors of white that the female eye.
Yes, that's right. But how many can the human eye? Your eye does this. Everybody's eyes do this unless you're colorblind. Look at that grammar, would you? Does this. Come on, give me more estimates. No, they give a figure of 248,000 colors that the human eye deals with. Now that's a bit of an over-endowment because we don't need that many. Do we? I mean, we could get along with just black and white. We get along with black and white anyway in many areas. You know, it's either black or it's white. Or, I'm sorry, you're not supposed to use that anymore. It's red or green, let's say. And I says, well, I don't know how they came to that conclusion or what they're thinking, but think of what the sensorium can do. If the eye alone can do this, deal in this multiplicity of things, the human sensorium, if you look at all of the anomalous phenomena, the recorded anomalous, you know, we're talking about a mega computer of some kind, which is totally unnecessary to even account for evolution on Earth. Evolution can be accounted for on a very simplistic method. But why should evolution have ended up having people, us here, who have thousands and thousands and thousands of activities and little projects and capacities and so forth and so on that we don't even use? And yet we get from birth to the grave without them. See, I can get very emotional about this, although in my age I don't want to be emotional anymore. But it's a fact, you know. I look here and I see all of you not as the physical thing that you are, but as one of the fastest computers in existence, totally equipped to do things that we probably haven't even identified. And you're sitting here being fascinated with this miserable specimen. And I don't know if I'm making sense, because you can't make sense if you stay at a simplistic level. You're over-endowed. You're not using 99.9% of what you're endowed with. None of us are, even little me, you know. And but, you know, this is slightly beyond just mere remote viewing and things like that. But, you know, I've gone beyond remote viewing. I can't sit around in the early 1970s and say that's the rest of my life or anything like that. So, you know, this is one big answer that might answer a lot of questions, because it's my idea that we're just simply over-endowed for what we use. Materialists want to collapse us back to the fact that make us completely believe that we're only material bodies, and the only thing to life is what transpires between birth and death, and you should make the most of it and enjoy it the most. And that is BS, because you're an immortal soul, if nothing else, and you've got to think in these terms here, you know, like I'm already thinking about the next life. I do not want to be educated in a public school here in the United States, for one thing. We're an over-endowed species which is victimized consistently by the social surroundings that we're born into. Now, as to what we can use these things for, I don't really know, because you have to first find out what they consist of. But there are three things that we are endowed with which we don't use all the time, and one of them is called empathy. How many people here are empaths? Empathy graduates right away into compassion. How many people here are compassionate? Do you get slapped in the face for it? Yeah. Can't have compassion. It'll destroy our social fabric. Compassion leads immediately into telepathy. I mean, or telepathy leads right back into empathy. How can you be empathic if you're not telepathic to some kind of degree? There are many kinds of telepathy. Did you know that? There's just not one kind. I myself, 25 years ago, made a theoretical list of 136 different kinds of telepathy. I mean, being telepathic with the Dracena is one kind of telepathy, right? Being in telepathic touch with your obstinate son or daughter is, I mean, you don't want to talk, I mean, this is not a Dracena type of telepathy. This is something else. Being in telepathic touch with ETs, there's a different kind, hypothetically, if it were possible. How many of you here have telepathic empathy with gold deposits buried in the earth? When I was a child up in Telluride, Colorado, where I was born, which is a mining town, it was filled full of hopeful miners running around staking claims to find gold. There were people there that came and said, I can sense the gold. And most of them went out and staked a proper claim. And when the gold started coming in, they were also shot dead by other people who wanted to take it over. But I learned that you can sense things. Everything that you can sense requires a slightly different modulation. If you're going to hunt for gold and you're using the silver modulation, you're not going to find the gold. But you might find silver if it's there too. If you're searching for corabundums, those are rubies, emeralds, things like that, and you don't have the proper, as my friend, I can't think of his name right now, Marcel Vogel would have said, your internal piezoelectric crystal is not configured along those lines. And I said, well, can't you just turn it on? He said, yeah, you can turn it on. So this is a toggle switch thing here, and things like that. So we're multifaceted. We have, I don't know, you can't even, you think you might have 10 psychic abilities. Parapsychology used to be able to list only 9. But I can list 136 forms of telepathy alone. And anybody else could too if they just set their mind down to it and say, telepathy is not one just big thing. It's like an all-seeing crystal eye with rays in it, which sends out different kinds of rays, blah, 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 and things like that. So we're trapped in our conditioning, our word conditioning. Parapsychology trapped us in words. Did you know that? Do you know what the word precognition means? Well, they got it up in parapsychology to say that it means seeing the future. But if you, excuse me, pardon my bacon. I'm losing my teeth, so it's touch and go if I can even eat bacon anymore. Yeah, precognition, if you look up the word cognition in the dictionary, it says an idea that is realized at the time it's realized. And there's no pre to it, because if you put a pre to it, then it's an oxymoron. So parapsychology gave us a number of oxymorons, which everybody believes is effective language, right? Yeah. My vision of the future you don't want to hear about because you won't like it. There are some 75,000 nuclear warheads stockpiled on Earth around the planet, when 10 would do the job. You think they're going to sit there and be unused forever? And they're still building them. Weapons of mass destruction are proliferating in every country that's possible to do it. I just found out by reading a certain book last month that the Japanese were already experiencing in biological warfare in the 1920s in Manchuria. And these things, I just published a book called The Wisdom Category, Shedding Light on a Lost Light, which I use the weapons of mass destruction as a scenario that stands between us and the future. And I can't see beyond that. But because I'll see it in my next life, I guess, Whatever you're going to see in your next life, you usually can't see in this one because you're going to see it anyway, so it's a redundant thing. I don't like to talk about what I see about the future because I'm a Virgo, and Virgos are always pessimists, basically. Are you a Virgo too? Are you a pessimist?
No.
Oh, no. Try to be. Well, if you have to try to be, you're a pessimist. But people, even when I was here, 3 people said, how do I get rid of my blocks? I says, well, why are you thinking in terms of blocks? If you try to get rid of the block, You probably can't because you don't know where the block came from. And so I even wrote a book called Reality Boxes and Other Black Holes in Consciousness that says people want to change their reality boxes, but you know they're pretty well imprinted by the time you're 7, the basic ones. And by the time you're 14 and you undergo the sexual awakening and things like that, they become locked in stone or cement, things like that. So if you run around looking for blocks, you're investigating the negative. That's actually what you're doing. And that's okay. I mean, psychologists have made a great deal of money saying this is what we should do. We should find your blocks. Free association for the next 3 years and we might find a block at $180 an hour. Oh, I shouldn't say that either. You know, I'm just so mean. But, okay, it's fine. I don't care if people want to look at their blocks. I look and say, maybe I have a block here, and I look at it too. But what you could look at also is what toggle switch do I need to turn on? And your little subsystems will generate a picture for you sooner or later, even if it comes 3 weeks later in a dream, you know. And it'll be a symbolic, it'll be some kind of a thing like that. And maybe sometimes, if people are good dreamers that have verbal contact in it, and they see, you should have turned this one on when you were 10. That happens, you know. It does. So I don't have all the answers, you see. And what you want is a pat answer that affects just across the board and things like that. But the only thing I can think of that goes across the board is look for the good and wonderful in you, versus spending so much time to find out why you're not functioning very well. Both things should be done. I'm not saying that you should abandon looking at the negative, because you need to know what that's composed of too. But I can almost prove that most societies suppress searching for what is good in our species and in us as individuals, because what is good, if there became too much of it, would upset the social power structures that are in existence. So the way to keep people stupid, even if you make them literate, you know, universal literacy didn't start occurring until 1890. Everybody else was kept stupid, couldn't read or write. If you even make them literate and you focus them on the negative, what's wrong with us, what's wrong with us, what's wrong with us, what's wrong with us, and then you spend a whole life wondering what's wrong with us. Well, there's what's good with us too. And I think that deserves an equal amount of attention, just like the skeptics say they want equal airtime. I think the good in us deserves equal airtime. But now I'm being philosophical, and I'm 70, I'm way past the remote viewing stage, I'm way past even interest in my own life, because I got to get ready for the next one. So. Does that make sense? You know, my psychic career, if you want to call it that, started when I was 39 years old. And I thought that I was almost over with then. Well, you know, the dreadful age of 40 was coming up, which is supposed to be the high point before the down point starts, right? Now everybody says I should live to be 120. I should go for that. With this decomposing body, I don't think so. The realization, which took place about 10 years ago, you know, I've been through all this parapsychology garbage and this remote viewing garbage and the government garbage and this garbage and everything like that. I said, well, wait a minute, you know, there's got to be something somewhere that can act as what the alchemists used to call a philosopher's stone. You know, the answer to everything, or something like that. And so I said, well, what would that be? And I must say, that if our species did not have innate compassion toggle switches, we would have ceased to exist long ago. I mean, you can't go through 6,000 years of wars only. There has to be something behind the wars and things like that. And there was a philosopher who I hated for a long time because he was a Marxist. I can't think of his name right now, but he made a quotation which I put in one of my books that talked about compassion, and I said, well, that old Marxist, they're not interested in compassion. Marxists aren't interested. They're not supposed to be anyway. And because that's paranormal. Compassion is paranormal. But I think that, yeah, compassion. And from compassion comes all of the things that build and make and strengthen compassion. This doesn't mean you need to go overboard, because you got to get ready for things that might happen to you, and things like that. Yeah, compassion. I'd put it up there at the top somewhere. I've been surprised many times, and I don't know how my reality box has dealt with it. And, we all have reality boxes, whether we like it or not. And everything, I just go to bed for 2 weeks, and get up and start over again. I told my parents when I was 2.5 that I didn't like the name they gave me and I wanted the one I had before. That didn't last very long.
What was the one before?
I'm not going to tell you. Yeah, Cleopatra. I got bored with the experiments, humdrum experiments at S.R.I., and I told Russell, I got to do something exciting except this blah, 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 things in boxes and so forth and so on. So they said, well, what would you like to do? And I said, well, why don't we try to see if we can visit a planet? I mean, instead of something around the corner. So they agreed they would do that, and they set it up, and I threatened to leave, you see. I mean, you can't, if you're bored with what you're doing, you can't produce good stuff, right? So they set it up, and then they said, send it out to various scientists that it was going to take place, and so forth and so on. It was all prepared. And then the night before I was going to do this, I said, damn, what have I gotten myself into here? And I got raging drunk. I woke up in the morning with a hangover you wouldn't believe, and I had to go in and do this thing. And I drew the pictures very briefly, and I gave a very brief thing here, verbally and so forth and so on. And I said Jupiter had a ring around it, which nobody said was possible, and that there was an inverted greenhouse effect, which people didn't agree with, and they didn't agree with anything I said. And especially I said there are some kind of strange mountains there, which have not yet been discovered, but since then everything else that I said has been confirmed, and it only took 8 minutes to do this. About. Right, Hal? And then I went home and took 10 aspirins. And that's how it came about. The first real feedback didn't come until 7 years later, when a friend of Hal's from JPL called up and he said, we finally found the ring around Jupiter, and Ingo was the first one to discover it. But I did not get to be. If you discover something, you're supposed to be able to name it, right? Well, they just forgot about me. And when people used to come to SRI and visit Hal and everything from Washington and everything, that they wouldn't have lunch with me because they thought I could read their minds. So that says something. If you think about that, that says something. Namaste.